Ladies and gentlemen, the debate on the State of the Union is taking place for the 5th time today in the European Parliament, but it's the first time that we are having a debate conducted by a President of the Commission who was voted for with a great majority of this House, and immediately after a European Parliament election. And the speech is going to be one which has pretty much never before been so hotly anticipated. And I think we should all be proud today that this is going to be the first State of the Union address by a President of the Commission who has been elected into office under a new procedure which has made the European Union more democratic. And this House this morning is the House of European Democracy, and we are without any doubt facing a great welter of challenges with the migration crisis, the very difficult economic situation in certain member states, and the wars that are taking place on our doorstep, and we have to contribute to a solution, to finding a solution and to putting an end to those crises. This State of the Union is a debate where we have an exchange with the European Parliament, but it is also the time when the institutions of the European Union can show all together that they are prepared to work together in the spirit of the European community and face up to the challenges that lie ahead. Jean-Claude Juncker will, this morning, for the first time in his capacity as President of the Commission, be giving an address on the State of the Union. President Juncker, I will now give you the floor to present the proposals that you have for the European Union in the House of European Democracy here in the European Parliament. President Juncker, you have the floor.
Sehr verehrter Herr Präsident,
President in Office of the Council, ladies and gentlemen, dear members. For me it's a very pleasant duty, not just actually a duty but a real pleasure as President of the Commission for the very first time in my short life to give a State of the Union address in this chamber. As Luxembourg Prime Minister, frequently, I think to be precise it was 20 times that I gave a State of the Nation speech. But anyway, mostly I got applauded after the speech. People disagreed as to the substance, but everybody seemed to agree that it was too long. So today I run that self-same danger. I've not actually drafted or been able to draft this speech under the normal conditions, and you probably guess why, or probably some of you know why. But I will try and conclude in good style. The speech takes place in the framework agreement between the European Parliament and the European Commission, which has been concluded between us. And in that framework, the President of the Commission, that's the first half of September in fact, comes to the Parliament and does a Q&A session on the prior year and work to be tabled to the House to cover what the Commission is doing over the next few months. A year. So it's really the priorities of the Commission which are involved and of the European Union. And to that end, both with respect to Martin Schulz and the Prime Minister of Luxembourg as President in office, have received those priorities in writing. I've made the letter available, and appended to the letter is a document about how we're going to deal with the 10 working priorities of the Commission. A statement of intent. I'm not going to deal with all those topics today. I'm not doing that to be impolite to you, but it is in writing. And Frans Timmermans also has put things in writing. The Parliament has received that corpus in writing. But what I'm trying to do today is not to go into all the details, but try and make the general picture more understandable. If you like, I'm the first President of the Commission who is, in a way, directly endorsed, including by the vote of the European Parliament. That was my direct path to office, right from the very beginning. In fact, when I was speaking to you on the 14th of June, laying out my stall to you, I made it quite clear that I intend to make the Commission more political, and therefore the President of the Commission, because of the democratic procedures and the nomination procedures, would also be a political president. When I say political, basically I mean political in the very best connotations of that word. We are politicians, if you like, political people rather than just politicians. These days, in French anyway, it's got a bad connotation. So in the best connotations, we are, as you'd say in English, politicians. And by political, I don't mean we're going to politicize everything. That's not our wish. I just want to say that I really do feel that now is not the time to go ahead willy-nilly, business as usual. Please don't feel that's the case.
Ich würde Sie sehr herzlich bitten, nicht.
Don't count up how many times I use the word social. Just take it that my heart is full of the social. And don't count how many times I use economic, monetary or budget, those words. Very often people make rather empty speeches about this. Now we've got to be frank. It really, the bell tolls. The time has come. We have to look overtly at the huge issues with which the European Union is now confronted. And that's what I want to focus on now. Our European Union, I don't really want to fall into despond, but it's not in a good situation. There's no point of the President of the Commission, the representatives of European democracy and the peoples of Europe, to just put things in rosy colours. No, we're not in a good place. There's a lack of Europe in the European Union, and there's a lack of union in this European Union.
Das müssen wir ändern.
And that has to change. We have to change it, and now. Work together to that end. I think that is the remit we've got from the European electorate. And that actually corresponds to the remit you gave to me.
I don't know why you are becoming nervous when you are speaking about the European Union. So, now, you can interrupt me from time to time. I will not at each time respond to what you are saying, because what you are saying is worthless. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, whatever work programs or legislative agendas say, the first priority today is and must be addressing the refugee crisis. Since the beginning of the year, nearly 500,000 people have made their way to Europe. The vast majority of them are fleeing from Syria, the terror of the Islamic State in Libya, or dictatorship in Eritrea. The most affected member states are Greece, with over 200,000 refugees, Hungary, with more or less 150,000, and Italy, with 120,000. The numbers are impressive. For some, they are frightening. But now is not a time to take fright. It is a time for bold, determined, concerted action by the European Union, by its member states and by its institutions. The first of all the matters, before other considerations, is a matter of humanity and human dignity. And for Europe, it's also a matter for historical fairness. We Europeans, we are all Europeans here. Oh yeah, okay. Okay, I'm noting that you do think that you are not Europeans. Okay, well said, but not well done. This is not a time to take fright. It's a time of humanity and of human dignity. We Europeans, all of us, I thought before the interruption, all of us, we should remember well that Europe is a continent where nearly everyone has at one time been a refugee. Our common history is marked by millions of Europeans fleeing from religious or political persecution, from war, from dictatorship, from oppression. Huguenots fleeing from France in the 17th century. Jews, Sinti, Roma, many others fleeing from Germany during the Nazi era of the 30s and the 40s of the last century. Spanish Republicans fleeing to refugees camps in southern France at the end of the 1930s after their defeat in the Civil War. Hungarian revolutionaries fleeing to Austria and elsewhere, everywhere in Europe, after their uprising against communist rules was oppressed by Soviet tanks in 1956. Czech, Slovak citizens seeking exile in other countries, including mine, after the oppression of the Prague Spring in 1968. Hundreds of thousands were forced to flee from their homes after and during the Yugoslav wars. That was by the end of the last century, not centuries ago, by the end of the last century, in the last decade of the 20th century. Have we forgotten that there is a reason there are more McDonald's living in the United States than the entire population of Scotland? That there is a reason the number of O'Neills and Murphys in the US exceeds by far those living in Ireland? Have we forgotten that 20 million people of Polish ancestry live outside Poland as a result of political and economic emigration after the many border shifts, forced expulsions and resettlements during Poland's so often painful history? Have we really forgotten that after the devastation of the Second World War, 60 million people were refugees in Europe? That as a result of this terrible European experience, a global protection regime, the 1951 Geneva Convention on the Status of Refugees, was established to grant refuge to those who jumped the walls in Europe to escape from war and totalitarian oppression. We Europeans should know and should never forget why giving refuge and complying with the fundamental right to asylum is so important. The fundamental right to asylum is one of the most important international and European values. We should not forget that. I've said in this House and elsewhere in the past that we are too seldom proud of our European heritage and our European project. Yes, in spite of our fragility, of our weaknesses, our self-perceived weaknesses, today it is Europe that is sought worldwide as a place of refuge and exile. It is Europe today that represents a place of hope, a haven of stability in the eyes of women and men in the Middle East and in Africa. This is something, I have to say this here, this is something to be proud of and not something to fear. Europe today, ladies and gentlemen, in spite of many differences amongst the member states, is by far the wealthiest place and the most stable continent in the world. Those who are criticizing Europe, the European integration, the European construction, the European Union, have to admit that this is the place of peace and that this is the place of stability, and we should be proud of this. We have the means to help those fleeing from war, terror, oppression. I know that many now will want to say that this is all very well, but Europe cannot take everybody. It is true that Europe cannot house all the misery of the world, but let us be honest and put things into perspective. There is certainly an important, an unprecedented number of refugees coming to Europe at the moment. However, they still represent just 0.11% of the total European Union population. In Lebanon, by comparison, refugees represent 25% of the population in a country which has only 1/5 of the wealth we do enjoy in the European Union. Who are we that we are never making this kind of comparisons? Who are we? Let us be clear and honest with our often worried citizens. As long as there is war in Syria and terror in Libya, the refugee crisis will not simply go away. We can build walls, we can build fences, but imagine, without being demagogic, imagine for a second if it were you, your child in your arms, the world you knew torn apart around you. There is no price you would not pay. There is no wall you would not climb. No sea you would not go to sail. No border you would not cross if it is a war of the barbarism and the so-called Islamic State that you are fleeing. We are fighting against the Islamic State. Why are we not ready to accept those who are fleeing the Islamic State? We have to accept these people on the European territory. It is high time to act, to manage the refugee crisis, because there is no alternative to this. There has been a lot of finger pointing, not enough finger pointing, but too much finger pointing in the past weeks. Member States have accused each other of not doing enough or doing the wrong thing. And more often than no fingers have been pointed from national capitals towards Brussels. Brussels is always accused if member states are failing. If member states are not doing their job, Brussels, the Commission, the European Parliament is accused of not doing the job. We could all be, not all, the majority of this House and myself and my Commission, we could be angry about this blame game. But I wonder who that would serve. Being angry does not help anyone. Blaming others does not help the refugees and the migrants. And the attempt of blaming others is often just a sign that politicians, policy makers, sometimes lawmakers, are overwhelmed by unexpected events. Instead, we should rather recall what has been agreed that can help in the current situation. It is time to look at what is on the table and move swiftly forwards. We are not starting anew. Since the early years of this century, the Commission, not mine, the one of José Manuel Barroso, has persistently tabled legislation after legislation to build a common European asylum system. And the Parliament and the Council have enacted this legislation, piece by piece. And the last piece of legislation entered into force just in July 2015, 2 months ago. Across Europe, we now have common standards for the way we receive asylum seekers, in respect of their dignity, for the way we process their asylum applications, and we have common criteria which our independent justice systems use to determine whether someone is entitled to international protection. But these standards, honourable members of Parliament, these standards need to be implemented entirely and respected everywhere in Europe in practice. And this is clearly not the case. Before the summer, not after the summer, before the summer, the Commission started the first series of 32 infringement proceedings to remind Member States of what they had previously agreed to do. That's a matter of credibility. We are legislating, and we are not implementing. It's a matter of credibility that Member States are implementing and respecting commonly agreed international and European laws. A second series of infringement proceedings will follow in the days to come. Common asylum standards are important, but they are not enough to cope with the current refugee crisis. The Commission, the Parliament, the Council said in the spring that we need a comprehensive European agenda on migration. We proposed this as a Commission in May, and it would be unfair to say that nothing has happened since then. We have tripled our presence at sea. 122,000 lives have been saved since then. Every life lost is one too many. It's one too many. But many more have been rescued that would have been lost otherwise, an increase of 250%. We should be proud of that performance. 29 member states and Schengen associated countries are participating in the joint operations coordinated by Frontex in Italy, Greece and Hungary. 102 guest officers from 20 countries, 31 ships, 3 helicopters, 4 fixed-wing aircraft, 8 patrol cars, 6 thermal vision vehicles and 4 transport vehicles. This is a first measure of European solidarity in action, even though more will have to be done. We have redoubled our efforts to tackle smugglers and to dismantle human traffickers group. Cheap ships are now harder to come by, leading to less people putting their lives in peril in unseaworthy boats. As a result, the central Mediterranean route has stabilized at around 115,000 arriving during the month of August, the same as last year. We now need to achieve a similar stabilization of the Balkan routes, which has clearly been neglected by all policymakers. The European Union is also the #1 donor in the global efforts to alleviate the Syrian refugee crisis. Around €4 billion have been mobilized by the European Commission, that means by you too, and member states in humanitarian development, economic and stabilization assistance to Syrians in their country and to refugees and their host communities in neighboring Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, Turkey and Egypt. Indeed, just today we launched 2 new projects to provide schooling and food security to 240,000 Syrian refugees in Turkey. And by the way, I would like to applaud the efforts of Jordan, of Turkey, and of Egypt and of Lebanon. These countries, by far poorer we are, they are making efforts we should applaud to and we should recognize, and in moral and in financial terms. We have collectively committed to resettling over 22,000 people from outside of Europe over the next year, showing solidarity with our neighbours. Of course, this remains very modest, too modest by comparison to the Herculean efforts undertaken by Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon, who are hosting over 4 million Syrian refugees. But I'm encouraged that some member states are showing now their willingness to significantly step up our European resettlement efforts. This will allow us very soon to come forward with a structured system to pool European resettlement efforts more systematically. It has to be done, and it will be done. Where Europe has clearly under-delivered is on common solidarity with regard to the refugees who have arrived on our territory. To me, it is clear that the member states where most refugees first arrived, and at the moment these are Italy, Greece and Hungary, cannot be left alone to cope with this enormous challenge. This is why the Commission already proposed an emergency mechanism in May. Not now, back in May, to relocate initially 40,000 people seeking international protection from Italy and Greece. And this is why today we are proposing a second emergency mechanism to relocate a further 120,000 people from Italy, Greece and Hungary. This has to be done in a compulsory way. I call on Member States to adopt the Commission proposals on the emergency relocation of altogether 160,000 refugees at the Council of Interior Ministers on the 14th of September. We are not talking about 40,000, we are not talking about 120,000, it's 160,000. That's the number Europeans have to take in charge and have to take in their arms. And I really hope that this time everyone will be on board. No poems, no rhetorics. Action is what is needed for the time being. What is happening to human beings? We are talking about European beings. We are not talking about numbers. Human beings coming from Syria and Libya today could easily be the case in Ukraine tomorrow. Are we making selections? Are we distinguishing between Christians, Jews, Muslims? This continent has made the best experience to distinguish on the basis of religious criteria. There is no religion, there is no belief, there is no philosophy when it comes to refugees and to those who are fleeing. Ladies and gentlemen, winter is approaching. Do we really want to have families sleeping in railway stations, in Budapest and elsewhere, in tents, cold tents during night, on shores, in Kos? We are in charge of the winter period for those who had to flee their countries for the reasons I have mentioned. Of course, relocation alone will not solve the issue. It is true that we also need to separate better those who are in clear need of international protection and are therefore very likely to apply for asylum successfully, and those who are leaving their country for other reasons which do not fall under the right of asylum. This is why today the Commission is proposing a common EU list of safe countries of origin. This list will enable Member States to fast-track asylum procedures for nationals and of countries that are presumed to live safe in. The presumption of safety must, in our view, certainly apply to all countries which the European Council unanimously decided meet the basic Copenhagen criteria for EU membership, notably as regards democracy, the rule of law and fundamental rights. It should also apply to other potential candidate countries on the Western Balkans in view of their progress made towards candidate status. I am of course aware that the list of safe countries is only a procedural simplification. It cannot take away, and I would act strongly against that, the fundamental right of asylum for asylum seekers coming from Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, Kosovo, Montenegro, Serbia and Turkey. But it allows the national authorities to focus on those refugees which are much more likely to be granted asylum, notably those from Syria. And this focus is very much needed in the current situation. A list of safe countries is not taking away asylum rights from those people coming from the countries being listed. That's important. It's important. We are not neutralizing the Geneva Convention. Asylum is a right. And the countries being on the list of safe countries have to know that if they are taken off of this list because fundamental rights would not be ensured in these countries, they are losing their chance to join the European Union. These two things are going together. Safe list, yes, but it is time we prepare a more fundamental change in the way we deal with asylum applications, and notably the Dublin system that requires that asylum applications be dealt with by the first country of entry. We need more Europe in our asylum policy. We need more union in our refugee policy. A true European refugee and asylum policy requires solidarity to be permanently anchored in our policy approach and our rules. This is why today the Commission is also proposing a permanent relocation mechanism, which will allow us to deal with crisis situations more swiftly in the future. More swiftly in the future, that means more swiftly than in the past. A common refugee and asylum policy requires further approximation of asylum policies after refugee status is granted. Member States need to take a second look at their support, integration and inclusion policies. The Commission is ready to look into how EU funds can support these efforts. And I'm strongly in favour of allowing asylum seekers to work and to earn their own money whilst their applications are being processed. Labour, work, being in a job is a matter of dignity. Those who are working are finding back the dignity they had before they were leaving, and so we should do everything to change our national legislation in order to allow refugees, migrants, to work since day one of their arrival in Europe. A united refugee and asylum policy also requires stronger joint efforts to secure our external borders. Fortunately, in the European Union, we have given up border controls between member states of the Schengen area to guarantee free movement of people, a unique symbol of European integration. And this Schengen system will not be abolished under the mandate of this Commission. But the other side of the coin to free movement is that we must work together more closely to manage the external borders. This is what our citizens do expect. The Commission said it back in May, and I said it during the election campaign together with Martin, together with Guy, together with No, I'm not pointing at Mrs. Keller, but I was just thinking on Mr. Tsipras. And I'm not confusing the two. We need to strengthen Sky. Significant. Bitte? José Bové est là. Oui, je l'ai vu tout à l'heure. Salut José. We need to strengthen Frontex significantly and develop it into a fully operational European border and coast guard system. That is certainly feasible, but it will cost money. The Commission believes that this is money well invested. This is why we will propose ambitious steps forwards to a European border and coast guard before the end of this year. A truly united European migration policy also means that we need to look into opening legal channels for migration. But let us be clear, this will not help in addressing the refugee crisis we are currently in. But if there are more safe, controlled roads open to Europe, we can manage migration better and make the illegal work of human traffickers less attractive. Let us not forget we are an aging continent in demographic decline. We will be needing talents coming from everywhere in the world. Over time, migration must change from a problem to be tackled to a well-managed resource. To this end, the Commission will come forward with a well-designed legal migration package in early 2016. This is highly important. Migration has to be legalized. It's not sufficient to protest against illegal immigration. We have to organize legal ways to Europe. A lasting solution will only come if we address the root causes, the reasons why we are facing this important refugee crisis. Our European policy must be more assertive. Foreign policy must be more assertive. We can no longer afford to be ignorant, disunited with regard to war or instability right in our neighbourhood. We have to find a solution. Maybe that we are too weak for achieving this, to the Libyan problem. We have to address in a more solution-oriented way the Syrian crisis. I call European diplomatic offensive European diplomatic offensive to address the crisis in Syria and in Libya. We need a stronger Europe when it comes to foreign policy. I'm very glad that Federica Mogherini, our highly determined High Representative, she's high because she's highly determined, has prepared the ground for such an initiative with her diplomatic success in Iran. She has prepared the ground for such an initiative with her diplomatic success in the Iran nuclear talks, and I would like to congratulate Federica for that extraordinary performance. In order to facilitate the work of our High Representative, Federica, the Commission today is proposing to establish an emergency trust fund, starting with 1.8 billion euros from our common EU financial means to address the crisis in the Sahel and Lake Chad regions, the Horn of Africa and the North of Africa. We want to help create lasting stability, for instance by creating employment opportunities of local communities and thereby address the root causes of destabilisation, forced displacement and illegal migration. I expect all EU member states to pitch in and match our ambitions. We need this emergency trust fund in order to prevent future crises. And we need higher development aid budgets. I don't like the expression development aid, cooperation budgets. It's abnormal that member states of the European Union are reducing their budgetary efforts when it comes to aid development. They have to be increased. I do not want, Mr. President, to create any illusions that the refugee crisis will be over any time soon. It will not, and we have to know that. But pushing back boats from piers, setting fire to refugee camps, or turning a blind eye to poor and helpless people, that is not Europe. Europe, that's the baker in Kos who gives away his bread to hungry and weary souls. Europe is the students in Munich and in Passau who bring clothes for the new arrivals at the train station. Europe, that's those standing at the Munich rail station applauding and welcoming refugees. The Europe I want to live in is illustrated by those who are helping. The Europe I don't want to live in is a Europe refusing those who are in need. The crisis is stark, and the journey, of course, is still long. I'm counting on you in this House, the House of the European democracy, and on all Member States to show European courage going forward in line with our common values and history. Monsieur le Président,
President, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, as many of you are, I realize that I have already exceeded the speaking time which would normally be allocated to me for my State of the Union address, and as has formerly been the case for a President in office of the Commission. But I do need to take some time, given the situation, to talk about a number of other issues. First of all, Greece, which is very close to my heart. We've had very serious debates about the Greek crisis. It's a debate which affects us all very profoundly. It's been a difficult debate, and I endeavoured at great length to explain to the President of Greece that we were democratic countries dealing on a democratic basis. And here you are members of Parliament, and parliamentarians subscribe to the principle of parliamentary democracy, which is paramount in the 18 other countries which form the Eurozone. So I had serious discussions about this with the former Prime Minister. The Commission has been the victim of attacks from certain member states who felt that they were not necessarily able to accept the proposals aimed at finding a solution to the Greek crisis. I said then, and I would reiterate here today, as I said before, that the Commission has a weighty duty, and one of them is to be the custodian of the general interest. So the Commission had to deal with the Greek issue, because failing to do this would have been a great weakness on our part, and it would have been a failure on the part of the Commission and dereliction of its duty. Therefore, we did what we felt was right and we felt was our duty. And in that context, obviously, we have been subject to criticism from various quarters. But I felt that it was important that I was engaged in this debate, despite the excellent work done by the staff and civil servants in Brussels right throughout the holidays and the parliamentary recess. I did not feel that it was correct, right or proper to leave it up to the civil servants to resolve the Greek crisis. We ourselves are deeply involved in it. Vice President Dombrovskis, Frans Timmermans, Pierre Moscovici, myself and the other commissioners in the college have been deeply involved in working to try to find a solution to a very pressing problem. The Commission and its President felt that it was not an option to fail to find a solution to the Greek crisis. It was absolutely essential for us to recognise and to say that Grexit was not an option. If we hadn't said that loudly and clearly, Grexit could have happened.
Et j'ai dit à Monsieur Tsipras,
and I said to Mr. Tsipras and other members of the Greek authorities at the time that it was important that they understood that this didn't mean that they would be saved at any cost. I was not a magician. As I said to Alexis Tsipras, I didn't have a magic wand. I couldn't pull a rabbit out of a hat, and so forth. I had to make it clear to him, and I think that he understood that Grexit was a possibility, but it was not an option which we were going to mention publicly. But it was not something that was absolutely excluded as a last resort. So we felt that we did what we had to do. And I have always believed that this is our responsibility. The Greek issue is not just a question of consolidating public finances and structural funds. All that is extremely important, yes, but it was a much more weighty problem than that, impacting on the whole issue of economic growth in the country, its position in the European Union, and so forth. And I think that the European Union is delighted to have Greece as a member. And I have been profoundly perturbed by comments in recent months that Greece should leave the euro or should leave the European Union and that it wasn't a serious-minded partner in Europe. I think that the Greeks who are least well off are hard-working people who are doing their absolute utmost to try to ensure that their country does make progress. And I think we need to show respect to the Greeks, and there has been a failure to do that in some quarters in recent times.
Je voudrais que le programme sur lequel nous...
We have agreed on a programme, as you know, and I would like this programme to be respected by all Greek governments, by the Greek government that negotiated it, by future Greek governments, and all future Greek governments. There are a number of rules which have been agreed, and in the past some of these agreements have been flouted in the European Union and the Eurozone. But I think this time we all need to realize that we are serious and for real, and we require respect of the arrangements and agreements that have been reached. 35 billion has been allocated to this fund to generate economic and social growth in the Republic of Greece, and I would like this offer, which is not simply a gift in the spirit of generosity, but is an offer made in the European spirit. I would like it to be respected and accepted for what it is in Greece, and to think that we can make progress. The crisis is, of course, not finished. For all we feel that we have managed to make progress in the Greek crisis and bring it towards a resolution. There are over 17 million people in the Eurozone who are unemployed, and levels of unemployment are absolutely unacceptable in Europe, and the economic recession will only be over once we have full employment in Europe. Sometimes I pause to reflect on why it should be that a country which is as rich as Europe is should be so far away from respecting the fundamental rules which should be respected by all, men and women, old and young. Every individual has the right and entitlement to a job, and this is something which is of paramount importance in Europe. The AAA status is absolutely essential, and we need to return to a situation of full employment. This is far from impossible.
Cela présupposera que nous
Of course, this will presuppose that we continue to consolidate our budgets and to work on structural reform and to invest. These are three strands of our vital policy, and the Council has before it an investment plan, 315 billion investment plan, which we hope will be launched in detail in the foreseeable future. I think that all those who are in positions of power and responsibility in companies, unions and politics in the European Union should be working in favour of growth in Europe. This should be their mantra. The Juncker plan, of course, paradoxically, has been baptized the Juncker plan, but it is in fact a plan for investment, and I certainly am committed to making it a success in its own right, not just because of its association with my name personally. And I'd like to think that everybody who is involved with it will do their absolutely utmost, because it's vital for growth and employment.
Mais tout cela, mesdames et messieurs les députés,
Ladies and gentlemen, members of Parliament, this is all very important, but on its own it is not enough. We need to have a clearer strategic vision of where we are going in the future, and this is why we have the 5 Presidents programme on deepening the European Union. I said 5 Presidents because, not just in the interest of my autobiography, but as a matter of principle, I wanted the President of Parliament to be involved in this work. So we have produced this 5 Presidents report, which involves the European Parliament. And this is a report which looks forward to a future of European monetary union, which of course will involve the European Parliament intimately. And this is why I wanted your President to be involved right from the outset in the work that was being done. He presented a collective and a personal viewpoint on our proposals. We weren't all happy all the time with what was said, but we felt it was absolutely essential that we had an interinstitutional discussion and approach on all of this, and therefore I can assure you that your views have been expressed and factored into this report, and I feel that it is essential in looking towards the future of economic and monetary union that the Parliament has a much stronger role to play than it has had hitherto. It should be involved in economic governance in the European Union. And I have been saying since 1991, when I was Minister of Finance in Luxembourg and working closely at that time with Nicolas Schmit, when I was chairing the Intergovernmental Conference on Economic and Monetary Union, there were a number of people who were in favour of economic governance, and one of them was Jacques Delors, Pierre Bérégovoy, also, who's sadly no longer with us, Philippe Mistat, who will constantly remind us of what we agreed then, and I myself, well, I am still here and I'm still with you, apparently eternal in my positions in Europe. In any event, here at that point we wanted to come up with a treaty which enshrined the rules which should govern the Eurozone. And there are many, I think, nowadays who don't understand that economic governance, or wirtschaftliche Steuerung, is something to which we subscribed a long time ago.
25 years ago. Nous allons vous proposer.
So, against this backdrop, we hope to work towards a deeper economic and monetary union, a system of deposit guarantees, and various other initiatives. I think it's essential that we have a common deposit guarantee scheme, and our intention is to do this in the form of a reinsurance scheme. It won't be a mutualization of debt, but it will be a reinsurance scheme, and we feel that it should give greater certainty to investors and lenders in Europe, and therefore we are very much in favour of this. We're also in favour of introducing a European Treasury. Obviously, this is something which will need to be discussed in greater detail, and it may sound like a slogan. Obviously, there will be a lot of work to be done on the content of it, but I think it's important that the European Union should have a treasury which can work with the stability mechanism and can dovetail with the work being done by that institution in order to guarantee greater sustainability and stability. As to fiscal policy, there is a lack of union in Europe. The Commission has taken note of this and therefore has decided that exchange of information on fiscal matters and tax arrangements should be implemented by the Council. We are therefore going to produce draft legislation to that effect. When I was 17 or 18, I remember very clearly understanding that tax was imposed on revenues where they were generated, and we feel that this is a principle which is paramount in economics and should be respected in the European Union.
Tout comme nous devons agir en faveur.
We also feel that it's absolutely essential that we work on the basis of this simple rule which has all too often been flouted in the past, and therefore we feel that throughout Europe it is absolutely essential that we have respect for the rules that are in place. And we feel that we should have a fair remuneration in Europe, the same work for the same job, wherever it is in the European Union. That is only right and proper. As far as social policy is concerned, Marianne Thyssen is proposing a range of social policy measures which will be put forward in 2016, because the European Union is much more than Greece, money and finance, Ukraine. The European Union is a common set of values, inter alia social policy values, on which our union is founded and to which we subscribe wholeheartedly.
Mr. President, now I have a serious problem, because you would like me to interrupt, I know, but I'm in the middle of my speech. J'ajouterai donc rapidement.
So I shall simply add that the European Parliament will need to remain the Parliament of the European Union beyond the confines of this debate.
Oui. Je suis en train de faire une sélection, mesdames et messieurs.
Yes, I am selecting the salient points from the remainder of my speech. I think it's essential that we have international representation of the Eurozone, and we need to improve on that. It is abnormal that the Bretton Woods institutions and the International Monetary Fund are bodies where we don't have proper European representation, but all countries are represented their own views as they see fit. So the President of the Eurozone should be representing the Eurozone in these bodies. And we do need to have single representation in the both in the Bretton Woods institutions and the IMF as a matter of priority. I think that the country-specific recommendations which are issued by the Commission should be complied with by the Member States. We've reduced the numbers to some 3 per country in recent times. We submit them to the Council, and the Council then takes note of the reforms which are necessary, and it is essential that the 3 reforms per country are implemented and enforced, because it is essential that this happens. It's important that the Member States take responsibility at national level for the recommendations put forward by the Commission and endorsed by the Council.
The United Kingdom. Because when campaigning, I was advocating a fair deal with Britain, and I'm totally convinced that we will have a fair deal with Britain. I've established in the structures of the Commission a specific special group for the negotiations with Britain, under the leadership, by the way, of a British citizen who is a European. That's not a contradiction. That's not a... Yeah. I was hesitating between Jonathan Fall and Nigel Farage, and then I made a choice. I took Jonathan Fall. And Nigel, of course, will be his greatest supporter, because the one is British and the other is British and European, so you have to come together, and you will, of course. Of course, the United Kingdom and the British government and the British policymakers are right when they criticise the European Union for being too bureaucratic, for these overdoses of regulation. It is the programme of my Commission to bring down this regulation, and under the leadership of the first Vice President, Frans Timmermans, we are doing everything we can do in order to make sure that the regulation in the European Union will be a better one. But better regulation does not mean destruction, does not mean no rules, does not mean that the European Union should stand away from everything which has to be organised in a proper way in Europe. We have launched the digital single market. We have launched the energy union. We are step by step, progressively, completing the internal market, because the internal market is not complete. We are taking initiatives after initiatives in order to promote entrepreneurship in Europe. These are all requests of the British government, and more largely than that, of the British policymakers. The problem is that this cannot be requested from this Commission, because this Commission is doing exactly that. And I would like our British friends to support the initiatives of the Commission in that very field. The same is applying to the need we do see to conclude as many trade agreements with leading nations in the world, including the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. I'm in favour of the TTP treaty. But I'm not in favour of giving up European standards, European principles. As in the case of Britain, the freedom of movement of workers cannot be touched. The same applies to the Transatlantic Partnership Agreement. We have our basic values, we have our principles, and these principles cannot be given up during these negotiations with the United States. And I'm strongly in favour, as is Cecilia Malmström, the excellent trade commissioner we have. I'm in favour of a maximum of transparency, but I'm against developing publicly negotiation positions of the European Union. We are weak, and we are weak the more we are telling those we are negotiating with what we do intend to do if our positions will not be accepted, the weaker we are. We are in international negotiations. I'm in favour of transparency, but I'm also in favour of seriosity. And negotiations have to be conducted in a serious way. I should have one word, one para, one speech on Ukraine. We are supporting the democratic efforts of the now President of Ukraine. We have to support this man because he has the courage of action. And in this country, this is not an easy thing to be done. And those who are doubting about our involvement, our engagement in the Ukraine case will be proven wrong, because we have offered in so many talks to President Poroshenko all the needs Ukraine was asking for, and we will continue in that way. We were lending 3.41 billion euros in 3 macro financial assistance programs to Ukraine. We were helping to broker a deal that will secure Ukraine's winter gas supplies. And we are advising our friends there on the reform of the judiciary. I will do everything to enable the European Council to give visa-free right to travel to Ukrainian citizens. If the conditions are fulfilled, it has to be done. As Guy Verhofstadt was saying months ago in this House, the Maidan rallies were not only about democracy, about membership of the European Union. People there and people living in Ukraine now, they don't want to have a country where corruption is playing the role the corruption is playing in Ukraine. The Ukrainian Democrats want a corruption-free country, and so we have to attend them in that very field. I would like to say, because I'm very attentive and I have these things on my radar all the time, to our eastern member states, notably the Balkans, that the security and the borders of EU member states are untouchable. And I want this to be understood very clearly in Moscow. The member states of the Balkans and of other countries have to know that solidarity is not an empty word. We are there now, and we will be there if ever this is needed. The Balkans, Poland and others, mainly Poland and the Balkans, are the Baltics, pardon. Yeah, I don't confuse the two, by the way. The Baltics and Poland are very important members of the European Union, and they should not think that we would not be there if anyway their security and their borders would be in danger. We have as an obligation to protect, if needed, the security of everyone. I don't know if you were mentioning the Luxembourgish army when you are saying army. The Luxembourgish army is an excellent army. 771 soldiers, defense minister included. The Luxembourgish army will not be of great help, but others can be if needed. Yeah. I'm wondering myself why I like your interruptions. But I like them, because these are inspiring, because they are remembering me and reminding me what I should have told you before. Yeah. So I will never forget the meeting I had before being appointed with Nigel Farage and his group. It was very sportive, open and frank, and not without humour. That's, by the way, the only quality we are sharing, humour. That's something, yes. Could I have the permission of the President of the Parliament to distribute the text on climate change? Because that's important, but I'm running out of time. I'm speaking 72 minutes and 15 seconds, so really I don't want to more. Yeah, okay, yeah. I have new friends. Yeah. those sitting in the middle of Parliament, they are saying, well, we are starting to become tired. But those sitting there, they want me to continue. Yeah, okay. So you have
President of Commission. Would you mind waiting 1 moment, sir? The member sitting in seat 358 has got a mask on his face of Mrs. Merkel's face. You may not like her, but you have certainly made her look very pretty. I think it's Mr. Bonanno. Now, you've had your fun, Mr. Bonanno. Would you please sit down again?
Okay, machen Sie weiter, Herr Kommissionspräsident.
Okay.
Please do continue, President of Commission.
Okay, yeah, okay, bye-bye.
Auch das wird von europäischen Steuerzahlern finanziert.
This is being financed also by the European taxpayer. Mr. Juncker, do continue.
The European Parliament, Mr. President, is the place where you can meet everyone. Union in diversity. I would like, Mr. President, to say a few words, given the time constraints we have, on the climate change. The text of my speech will be distributed to a larger public in the next coming hours. I simply wanted to say that I do think that we have to be very ambitious as European Union on our way to Paris. I do think that we are doing major efforts, probably not enough, but more efforts, user efforts, than others are delivering. We are tackling the root causes of the next migration wave in the next coming decades, if we are addressing in a proper way the climate change problems, because tomorrow morning we'll have climate refugees, and we have to know that. We should not be surprised, astonished, if the first climate refugees are coming to Europe. We have to act now, because we don't have time to lose, and that's why I want the European Union and the Member States to be as ambitious as possible on our way to Paris. But I would like to say here that I do think that the European Union should not sign just any deal. Europe's priority has to be to adopt an ambitious, robust and binding global climate deal. That's a European duty, and we have to fight for that and to have to raise the voice against those who in our member states are not sharing that view. Europe is not neutral when it comes to climate change. Europe has to be an example, a model for others. Voilà, Monsieur le Président, Mesdames, Messieurs.
Well, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, it wasn't a state of the entire Union, but I didn't wish to deliver a poem on the European Union to you today, and at the end of an address that I admit was too long, which I shortened brutally, I have to confess that the European Union isn't in a great state, but we mustn't sit back and do nothing else than criticize the State of the Union, because in the course of the past year we have managed to carry out a number of important and substantial reforms, as I see it. I'm talking here about the Commission. We've got an agenda on migration adopted, and I wouldn't have it put to me and accept it that on migration the Commission has done nothing. Just this morning on the German television I heard a Bavarian minister criticizing the absence of the European Commission. Yes, I was on holiday. Weren't you on holiday at some point? You're quite right. But I was on holiday for 10 days. I worked 4 days on Greece and the others on migration, and the Commission came up with proposals in May. This is too readily forgotten. This isn't a problem that we discovered in May. It was others who realized with the terrible photos that we have this huge problem. We knew it. We have adopted a number of important additions to complete the single market, in particular on energy and on capital markets, and with my colleagues in the Commission that I would like to warmly thank for the excellent agreement that we had, I have to say it wasn't easy, but many have been Prime Ministers and know that bringing about agreement within an executive is something that has limits. And in the Commission we have collegiality and friendship, and I think I am proud of the Commission that I have the honour to be a president of. I'm proud because in the first months of our mandate we sent off to the two legislative arms of the Union major regulatory pieces of legislation which include the 10 priorities, on the basis of which, and I'm proud of this, I was elected by this august assembly. Not everything is fine. It isn't the best of all possible worlds. The world would be better if we were better. And it is incumbent on us, therefore, to ensure that we keep this work up. I know the weaknesses of Europe, but I also know how weak this continent of Europe would be if the European Union didn't exist. So, let us not stint in our works. Let us make further headway. Let us continue.
Vielen Dank, Herr Juncker.
Thank you, Mr. Juncker. Well, dear members, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Juncker, may I put a personal note to this? We all know that last Sunday your mother died and your father was severely sick because of this and is now in hospital, and that you put your duty now before your personal feelings. Your duty was prime, and I think I can speak for everybody in saying thank you for that and voicing our sympathy to you. We really feel for you because of your personal situation, and we really feel for you because of the death of your mother.
Das Wort für die EVP-Fraktion.
Now for the EPP, President Weber, President of the Commission, dear colleagues, for the EPP, first of all, I'd like to endorse what the speaker has just said. I'd like to thank you for the political speech. We elected a political president of the Commission who's given a political analysis and clear proposals. Thank you. But the most urgent issue first, migration. When we were in Milan, the Italian minister, Mr. Alfano, came to us and told us something. He'd been to a refugee home in the south, spoke with a family, and the mother said that she started off in Africa with 5 children and got to Italy with just 1 live child, and said that saw almost a dead soul behind empty eyes when he spoke about this. So, I mean, let's remember, these are human beings that we're talking about. Europe has got to be humanitarian. We've got to help people who knock on our outer doors. We've got to guarantee aid. As the President of the Commission said, if you look at what poor people are doing, Lebanon and Jordan, we in rich Europe have got to really do the necessary to do our humanitarian duty. So, dear colleagues, we've heard many statements here. The Slovakian Prime Minister said that he wanted only non-Muslims, just Christians. We speak for the Christian Democrats, and we have to make quite clear that we're not proud in Europe that that we have invented rights for Christians or Christian rights. No, we've got human rights, human rights. That's what we defend. Over the last few days, people are saying Europe has failed. We could read this in all the newspaper headlines. Corriere della Sera, a few days ago, I read the same thing. Franco Frattini, who was erstwhile responsible for internal affairs, and I remind him what he said. It wasn't possible to get support for what he said then from member states. And he was arguing for humanitarian. So it's the same thing now. It's not Europe, it's not Brussels which has failed, it's national egotism which is won over. So nevertheless, we've got to look at the reality. We've seen all these people come to Europe, and very often they're not accepted. They don't get proper legal process. So we've got to look to external controls. I mean, that's true. People say that we've got to use the asylum rules properly and fight abuse. That is also true. So, migration. I think that is linked to the economic situation in the continent. We need jobs in the continent, jobs for young people. I think the European Union has always and has continued to produce a decent standard of living and produce jobs, that's shown. And it's true that opening up world trade has not always helped us. But the mobility package of the Commission should help us. We should work on that basis. We are in a difficult situation. Farmers are in a difficult situation. We've got to help them too. It's all part of the same thing. Now, the economic situation and Greece. If you want to look at what should be done in the future, look at Ireland, Spain. We have wonderful growth rates there now. If you look to Greece, maybe we've got a few lost months, wasted months behind us. I hope in the future we'll be able to get together with Prime Minister Tsipras. I think he has now got respect for having changed course. Greece is no longer a place without a future. Tsipras, in changing course, has shown that the left ideology on this continent has failed, and nota bene Podemos. There's a lot to be said. Ukraine. Let us remember that this conflict in Ukraine does bring to mind many problems, including the visa problem the Commission mentioned. We've got to not accept Putin's drive for frozen conflicts. I think what we've got to do is follow your proposals. We can make a better Europe and involve Ukrainians in any discussion. This is a political commission. You have allowed us, President, to focus on the essential issues politically. You've done that. And you've allowed us to make progress in politics. 1.65 million jobs, you didn't mention it, but it's true, were created last year in this continent. That's also linked with what we're doing. You gave us an electoral program, you gave us your stall, as you said, and you kept to it. And we're very happy to see that in the EPP.
Vielen Dank, Herr Weber. Für die Fraktion der Sozialdemokraten hat jetzt das Wort Herr Vorsitzender Pittella.
Mr. Pittella, on behalf of the Socialist Group.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much indeed, President. I see the, rhetorically speaking, empty seat of the President of the Council, but I also see, I think that this is perhaps symptomatic of the lack of response in Europe, a lack of timely response particularly. This is something we have to address. Mr. Juncker, you are here today. I wish to convey to you the condolences of my group. As Mr. Schulz has said, you're here today, you've spoken to us, and you have shown how important you think the institutions are, and I'd like to extend my thanks to you for that. I'd like to thank you for your speech. I'm going to speak frankly too. There are a number of issues I want to touch upon. As you said, migration is extremely important, and Europe has got to be true to itself in this. It's got to put forward a proposal based on solidarity. There are refugees fleeing from war, and we have to welcome them into our continent. Otherwise, Europe doesn't exist as a concept, as a continent, as a union founded on solidarity. We should be out in the streets, meeting citizens, shaking hands with them. Often we talk about the distance between the institutions and the people, but now there is a distance between the people themselves, and I think we can only create Europe if we return to a greater unity and community. The Commission is doing well in trying to return us to this path. The Commission is doing well in suggesting allocation quotas for migration. I think this is a good idea. I think we do need to review Dublin. Migration is at the centre of everybody's thought, but there are other things that we need to deal with too. For example, there's the crisis of employment, the economic crisis, which divides rich from poor, which divides the continent. You've talked about the AAA status, which we need to return to. But first of all, we have to do other things. We have to ensure that the rules in force are actually respected. We've got to get rid of social dumping and flouting the rules in place. We've got to review the Posting of Workers Directive, and we have to ensure that we do something about 0 hours contracts, which are a shocking factor in our employment market, and we've got to make sure that jobs are more secure. We have to ensure that tax is paid where revenues are generated, and we have to have a proper common tax base. And we need to make sure that country-by-country reporting is enforced. Then fourthly, we need to remember Greece. You mentioned Greece quite rightly. You talked about the way in which the Economic and Monetary Union is failing, and we definitely need to implement this Five Presidents report as fast as we can to try to rectify this. But all these things are just small steps. We need to look at Pervenche BERÈS' report, which was adopted by this chamber not so long ago. We need to implement that, and we need to do something about sovereign debt, which is a shocking position for the European Union to be in. The Socialists feel too that it's time we talked about Eurobonds and investment. It's time we returned to put together a proper investment package which will support the economy and support society here. We need to have a sustainable circular economy, and this is why we've got so many absolutely vital deadlines coming up shortly, including the Paris conference. You talked about war being on the borders, the thresholds of our union. Indeed, Syria, Ukraine, look all around the European Union, there is war. Think back a year, and thanks to Federica Mogherini, the European Union has actually made major steps forward. We are no longer considered to be a weak force. We are considered to be an effective force which is widely recognized and able to make a contribution to restabilizing the world. We've got to return to an approach of cooperation, respect, solidarity amongst our peoples. We've got to invest in Africa. We've got to help Africa over the long term. President, I don't need to tell you, you know better than I do, we're not going to get a second chance. If we don't act now, the crisis will be irreversible. The European Union has got to be true to its vocation. We are supposed to be a great continent, and yet we're simply in the thrall of mercantilism and unbridled capitalism. This is not good enough. We need to make a choice. It's up to us to make that choice. We need to be those who make a success of the European Union. Otherwise, we condemn ourselves to be those who watch over the decline of the European Union to its demise. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Pittella. Für die ECR-Fraktion.
Thank you. On behalf of the ECR, Mr. KAMALL.
Mr. Juncker, before I start, can I also echo the words of Martin Schulz in terms of paying tribute to you personally for your courage, but also your sense of duty in coming here today to address us. We may not always agree, but actually I think we have to pay tribute to your courage and your sense of duty. Thank you very much. Don't worry, I'm not softening you up for a number of blows. Don't worry about that. Year after year, I sit in this chamber and we hear a lot of rhetoric from all sides. After all, that is the point of Parliament, to discuss. We hear a lot of ideology, a lot of idealism. I hear some people say that only more Europe is the answer. I hear others say that the EU is the cause of all our problems. And I fear we'll hear that same debate all over again today. And do you know what? That's why we never get anything done. That's why the EU has seen crisis after crisis. Look, I know that many of us from across the political spectrum, we came into politics because we wanted to help people. But in this chamber, we're paralysing this debate and this continent with ideology and dogma. Dogma that has caused fair-weather EU policies, like castles made of sand that fall into the sea or melt into the sea eventually. At the times, the debates, they verge on serialism, when you see someone walk down with an Angela Merkel mask. At other times, what we need is realism. We need some Euro-realism. And the migrant and refugee crisis is one example. Many people on the edges of this chamber deliberately seek to confuse economic migrants with refugees, either to let them all in or either to keep them all out. But we need to be clear about the distinction. People running for their lives, seeking sanctuary as refugees. We need to understand what they are running from. But for those not fleeing persecution or famine, we have to understand it's only human nature to want to seek a better life. But we must be clear in that case that the correct rules must be followed. There are currently legal migration systems that we have to adhere to. But we also need to be honest with our voters. The effects of the war in Syria, conflicts in Libya, Eritrea, Ukraine and elsewhere will be long-lasting. And for those who say that there are easy solutions are just plain wrong. But in the EU, rather than trying to find common solutions, we find our countries and institutions now trying to find someone to blame. Trying to find someone to blame rather than trying to find solutions. Now, some countries are unilaterally rewriting the rules. Others are clearly flouting them, undermining trust. But if there's one thing that the EU should be useful for, whatever our ideological views, surely it should be about bringing countries together to cooperate and to find solutions that we can all find together. So let's sit around a table. And I don't mean just the countries of the EU. This is an international crisis that needs an international response. Of the 4 million refugees from Syria, 90% are in camps in Jordan, Lebanon and Turkey. But some Middle Eastern countries take absolutely no one. Let's work out what each country can do to help those fleeing for their lives. But let's be clear, telling countries what to do Forcing a plan on them only risks more finger-pointing. It might make some of you feel better, but I fear it could actually make the crisis worse, and we're further away from a solution. Because different countries can help people in different ways, and let us recognise that. Yes, some countries might wish to take migrants already in the EU. That's their choice, but others will rightly say that they want to help the most vulnerable in the camps around Syria. We have an obligation to help the millions of people displaced by conflict, not just the thousands who managed to reach our shores. And that's why some countries, including my own, are focusing their efforts on these camps and on the ground, tackling the vulnerable, delivering over €1 billion of aid to Syrian camps and helping hundreds of millions of African refugees, and actually keeping our commitment of 0.7% of GNI to build an economic infrastructure in poorer countries around the world. Let's not dismiss that sort of assistance. Other countries can also make a contribution with more funding and assistance, setting up application centres closer to where people are fleeing from, so that the vulnerable people do not have to fall into the arms of the traffickers. Others can commit the hardware and intelligence to take out the traffickers completely. And for all of us, stabilising the situation will mean investing in resources to detain, swiftly process and return those who do not have a legitimate claim. In the ECR, we want a realistic, a holistic and a practical response. There should be no sacred cows if we're going to solve this problem together. President Juncker, over the last year, we have seen an unprecedented amount of sticking plaster placed on Europe's cracks. Not least the euro crisis. More sticking plaster. We need to start finding some real solutions. We need to tackle these problems in realistic ways. The time to point fingers is over. And I hope there won't be any more of that today. It might produce headlines, but it will not produce solutions. So let us sit down together and work together. Europe does not need a new Iron Curtain. Europe needs an iron will to discuss together, work together and find a solution together. I hope you will listen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kamall. Now, on behalf of the Liberal Group, may I call Mr. Verhofstadt.
I already did it personally to Mr. Juncker, my condolences for the death of his mother and also of my entire group. Now, Mr. President, maybe we can organize the debate next year a little bit different, and we could maybe invite 20 heads of states and government to this debate. There is enough place, I think, on this side of the House, because mainly I don't think that Mr. Juncker has 90 minutes to speak in the Council when he does his State of the Union. And on top of that, it gives them the possibility also to Mr. Tusk to be here, because we all accepted now a permanent president of the European Council. Well, I think he has to be there, the permanent president of the European Council. And not, and sorry, I know he's in the Middle East, in Ramallah and Jerusalem. He has not to be there. He has to go from capital to capital to develop a common European policy on asylum and migration. That is his task for the moment. But that said, I think that we come into the heart of the problem. And the heart of the problem is the lack of political will and, in fact, the lack of unity, Mr. Kamall, between the member states. Because what you are defending here, a few minutes ago, is pick and choose your refugees. It's like, okay, in Britain we do it that way, and in Germany we do it another way, and in Hungary certainly in another way, as we all know, with a fence and a wall. That's not the way to deal with such problems. Refugee crisis is a collective responsibility of the European Union. That is what is at stake. And what we have to do is to stop to act and react. We're reacting. Our member states are reacting. They are not acting. What happened is that in April we got a strategy in the Mediterranean. What we did, we increased a little bit the budget of Frontex. Okay, we think it's over, that the problem is solved. Problem is not solved. 2 months later, 50 days later already, there is in fact all these refugees block the front of the tunnel to Britain. And what we do? Okay, we give a little bit more money for tents and for food for these poor refugees there. in Calais. And we think, oh, the problem is over. Okay, now we can go in holiday. What I did, I have to tell you. And then it's Budapest. What we see, incredible refugees herded in a train station, treated, I have to tell, without any respect. And then we say, okay, let's open the balls. Let's put a number of the railway, open the railway a little bit, so that they can go to Austria, that they can go to Munich. And we think, okay, the problem is over. Well, such an attitude is disgraceful for Europe, because it is not treating refugees in the right way. And so, we have to recognize some countries are taking the responsibility, for example, Germany. In Munich, they accept 20,000 refugees in 5 days. But some countries are saying, yeah, we are going to do it in 5 years. And some countries are simply saying, no way, not for us. And fortunately, we have to tell, there was, in fact, in sharp contrast with this, I think, the thousands of ordinary people who have shown solidarity, more solidarity than our national leaders in our national countries, member states of the European Union. And so, my message, in fact not to you, Mr. Juncker, I apologize, but especially to the Council, because there is the problem today, is stop to say that it is a crisis of Europe. It is not the crisis of Europe. It's in fact a crisis of a lack of Europe. Let's say the truth to the people. Dublin is no Europe. Dublin is the negation, in fact, of Europe. He's saying simply, oh, it are the Italians, oh, it are the Greeks who had to be responsible from it. And so I think you did a very important step in May already by sharing responsibility. And I hope that the Council, not within a few months, but in a few days, can accept a number of these proposals. Also, the idea may be to have a legal migration system, because, yeah, many people are saying it's not the same. Refugees and economic migrants. We know it, but you can only solve it if you have then a legal migration system, a blue card, not 28 systems as we have today in Europe. Like the Americans have, they have a green card. We have also a blue card, but the blue card in Europe is the 29 system, on top of the 28 existing, and it's only Germany, in fact, was using this blue card. So we have to change that, and I'm pleased that in 2016 you have announced it. A few moments ago, you're going to come with a package on legal migration also to solve that problem. And then I want to end. I think the most important lesson, Mr. President, dear colleagues, is that the Council can make is that we cannot look away from a crisis in our neighbourhood. We will always pay the price of it. Don't think that we can have a conflict in the north of Africa, a conflict in the Middle East, and okay, that's outside Europe. We are paying the price for it. And we were convinced, in fact, also here in that House, that the Syrian war was not our problem. Numerous times we had here debates and people said, no, no, let's not do nothing, not helping the democratic forces. Well, we created two things. First of all, the Islamic State came in, and secondly, a huge refugee crisis. So I think we need to do something. If the conclusion of this debate is only repeating our old point of view, it's not enough. I think that we need a new initiative. And I think in the framework of the United Nations, to end the bloodshed in Syria, to stop terrorism, to make Syria again safe for the refugees so that later on they can return to their homes. So my plea to you, Mrs. Mogherini, my plea to you in the presidency of the Council is that you call on our representatives in the UN Security Council to launch such a new initiative the fastest as possible to end the conflict in Syria, because it's the only sustainable solution for this crisis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Verhofstadt. On behalf of the GUE, Ms. Zimmer.
Mr. President, Mr. Juncker, on behalf of my group, I would also wish to express our condolences and sympathy to you. As a person, Jean-Claude Juncker, I can assure you of those feelings, and I am not alone in this House in thinking this. But to your speech today, it was a matter of trying to sum up the State of the Union and tackle some of the core issues. First of all, on the migration issue, I would like to stress 2 points here. You'll be aware there has been an abduction of Zeus in Europe, and she was the first migrant in Europe, and this is at the root of all of our European history as Europeans. And you yourself referred to the fact that it would be illusory to think that the migration problem would be solved in the short term. Yes, it is an illusion. In this century, we're dealing with one of the greatest problems of our times, and we have to put it on a par with our fight against climate change. It's a global problem, it's a common problem, and we have to be active together. Now, you were making certain proposals. I would take them as a message to all of those in this House, or indeed to any of those that have responsibility in member states and who may adopt covert or overt racist positions, saying Europe mustn't be open to the world and Europe must, above all, support and uphold its own interests, and that it must resort to nationalist positions. We will look at your proposals. A lot of them strike me as being good steps, but many don't go far enough, I think. And I think we will see in future debates where exactly the progress is to be achieved. But I think we all agree that we need to have possibilities for legal immigration to the EU, that there must be a fair position based on solidarity, and that we mustn't stick with a quota arrangement that doesn't take into account the individual requirements of people. We need to have family reunification. All of these things must be taken into consideration, and we take you at your word when you say that the implementation of the Geneva Refugee Convention and the personal right to asylum is not something we will backpedal on, that we will be sticking up for those values. This is incumbent on us and will be our demand in this debate. And because we are making this urgent link here, we need to think about Greece and how we're solving problems within the European Union. On the issue of refugees and the Greek issue, we've got a nexus there with the island of Kos, and we see exactly how these things come together and whether a state can even work and take its responsibilities vis-à-vis refugees. In fact, with Hungary, with Greece, there are taboos that have been broken. There has been a country that has been dishonoured, and then you've got the European finance ministers round taking over management of the economy of Europe, and they now call the tune, and the European Parliament is in the antechamber looking in, and this is a state of affairs that must be changed. And if you are serious about what you say, then we mustn't allow the heads of government to pursue nationalist and small-minded policy. And finally, the European Union would end up being destroyed. So I would refer... Interruption by the President. You must now finish, Mrs. Zimmer. Yes, I am finishing. Mr. Juncker did exceed his time, in fact, by a factor of 3. Mr. President, Mrs. Zimmer, you've already gone over 1.5 minutes. Please, would you finish? Mrs. Zimmer, you said that we shouldn't count the words. Every individual word you said, I took that to heart. But what about the priorities? It doesn't say anything. You didn't say anything about the social priorities. This is the problem that we have. Please change that. Change that, because it is our joint job here. And this mustn't be excluded from what our common undertaking is here.
Frau Zimmer, ich finde das absolut...
Ms. Zimmer, it is completely unacceptable for you to overrun your speaking time like that. I am prepared to be generous, but you've overrun your speaking time by 2 entire minutes, which is far too much. And to try to justify it by saying just because Mr. Juncker spoke longer means you can speak longer, that is really not acceptable. You're not a chronometer of Parliament, and I will not put up with that. I now call on behalf of the Greens, Mr. Lamberts.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much indeed, President. Mr. Juncker, my sympathies, my condolences with you. You're living through a very difficult time. I also have great sympathy with your approach to the European Union and your take on that. Our union is based on the values of respect for human dignity, the rule of law, respect for human rights, and respect for the rights of individuals who belong to minorities. These are values which are common to the member states, to our entire society. They're characterized by pluralism, non-discrimination, tolerance, justice, solidarity, and equality between men and women. Those are the principles to which we subscribe. Those are the ones we should be invoking when we determine policy. Yet what are we talking about? We're talking about growth. We've seen greater poverty, inequality, unemployment, exclusion, low-quality employment. We've seen the member states arguing about tax. In the face of a dramatic situation with migration, we simply see barriers being erected. What do we say when the European Council simply resorts to national egotism and mudslinging? What do we say? Nothing. We need to have much greater unity. The Lisbon Treaty talks about ever greater union, ever closer union between the European peoples. Well, I certainly don't see this happening, but we need to be much closer in terms from our heart, but also in our heads. And we need to look at the treaty and we need to make sure that we keep it alive, that we show what the treaty means in terms of emergencies, social, environmental, democratic, economic and migration emergencies. We need to be able to live together, to act together, to work together. I think of all our citizens who need to work together to try to respect these ideals that are truly ours of human dignity. I think of our teachers who are teaching our young people who need to acquire the instruments they need to shape up positive life. I think of the farmers who work hard in order to feed the planet, and the researchers who are looking at all times for sustainable solutions to the huge challenges of our time. Look at the entrepreneurs who are working hard, investing and trying to restore balance in our economy. Look at the investment that is taking place in the energy zone, in the area of energy policy. We have got to ensure that it is properly focused. There is a great deal of good in humanity, but we're not seeing enough of it. Many people are prepared to stand up against the dictatorship of short-term profit and gain, and to defend the cause of human rights and respect for human dignity. But you've said, President, today that we need to recognize the value of the citizens, the principles on which our citizenship is founded, and we need to stand up for refugees who are escaping poverty and war. We need to be generous-spirited, and we need to show that Europe can live up to its principles, can be truly European, and can stand together and be open to others, not standing against them. We need to be open to change and open to a future which truly epitomizes our genuine values that you have mentioned. We need to build alliances, we need to build bridges, we need to recreate and regenerate hope. Without this, Europe is lost. It is a defeat for us if we can't deal with this migration crisis. A year ago, the Pope said in this very chamber that Europe had a huge responsibility to try to deal with the causes of conflict and to act. You're quite right, Mr. Juncker. You said the same, and you've been saying this since last spring. The proposals that you've put forward here have sketched out a roadmap for us to follow. Yes, you're quite right. We do need to have quotas for bringing migrants into Europe. Yes, we need to have legal channels for bringing migrants in. That's the only way in which we can bring to an end this trafficking business that ends in death, which is perpetrated by these ghastly traffickers. We need to respond to the emergencies, and on behalf of my group, I'd like to ask you to consider this. Here we are together in this Parliament. It's only 50 days a year we're here. All our offices are empty. They have heating, they have showers, they're not used. Why don't we use this secondary residence of the European Parliament, which is fully fitted out, to bring in migrants and refugees. We could perfectly well have our hemicycle in Brussels for our plenary sessions for the interim period to be defined. That, colleagues, is a specific, concrete proposal which would enable our Assembly to show that it truly was able to make actions reflect words and that it truly subscribed to the principle of solidarity and human dignity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lamberts. EFTD now, Mr. Farage.
Thank you. Mr Juncker, you've simply got this wrong. As I warned you in April, the Europeans' common asylum policy sets its terms so wide that to say that anyone that sets a foot on EU soil can stay, I said it would lead to a flow of biblical proportions, and indeed that is what we're beginning to see. And that's been compounded by Germany last week, saying that basically anyone can come. It's a bit too late now to draw up a list of countries from whom can stay and can't stay. All they have to do, as they're doing, is throw their passports in the Mediterranean and say they're coming from Syria. As we know, the majority of people that are coming, and the Slovak Prime Minister has been honest enough to say so, the majority that are coming are economic migrants. In addition, we see, as I warned earlier, evidence that ISIS are now using this route to put their jihadists on European soil. We must be mad to take this risk with the cohesion of our societies. If we want to help genuine refugees, if we want to protect our societies, if we want to stop the criminal trafficking gangs from benefiting as they are, we must stop the boats coming as the Australians did, and then we can assess who qualifies for refugee status. I noted your comments because there's a referendum coming in the United Kingdom. I look forward to seeing you in the UK. I know you intend to spend tens of millions of pounds of British taxpayers' money telling us what we should think. I have a feeling that the British people will warm to you on a personal level, but to suggest that getting rid of a few EU regulations is going to change our minds, sorry, unless you give Mr Cameron back control and discretion over our borders, the Brits within the course of the next year will vote to leave.
Für die ENF.
For the ENF, to Philippot.
Il est simple de résumer en...
It's very simple to say what's involved in the Union. One word, crisis. All sorts of crises. Diplomatic crisis. And people look to NATO, Syria, Libya. And these are countries you've destroyed. You've destroyed the nations of the country, of Europe as well. And so we've got a flow of Islamists. I'm really worried. You come up with some mad orders here. 160,000 illegals arrived, and you start saying we're going to have quotas. You're talking about naughty. You treat them as naughty schoolboys. No pressure is brought to bear on the oil monarchies of the Middle East. That's where we should be acting. People big business wants these people to come in. You bow the knee to that. And you talk about 500 million for social things, but all the rest for these illegal immigrants. The majority are illegal. So instead of thinking about, you jump up and down on your chairs or run around like headless chickens. No. You should really be looking at some sort of sympathy beyond the Atlantic as well. You say that people, you're giving food to people saying that Europe is a complete failure. We're going to see a referendum starting off in the United Kingdom. Let's hope that these things will get us to a Europe of democracy, prosperity and peace.
Das Wort hat jetzt die fraktionslose Abgeordnete.
For the non-attached members, Mrs. Morvai.
Thank you. Patriots, unite. First, I wanted to write and to say, patriots of Hungary, unite, because I'm deeply worried about my own homeland. Then I wanted to write, patriots of Europe, unite, because I know that many patriots around Europe feel the same way. And finally, I realized there are patriots not only in the receiving and transit countries of migration, but there are patriots also in the countries of origin, in African countries, in poor Asian countries. We all have the same dream: to live in our homeland, to work for our homeland, in peace, to keep our roots, our cultures, traditions. Let us unite, let us start thinking and working together for our common dream, and let us make the world a better place. Thank you.
On behalf of the Council, Minister Schmit now has the floor.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, President of Commissioners, on behalf of Council, I would like to thank President Juncker for his address on the State of the Union, for his lucid analysis of the situation and vision for the Union, and for having said things as they are, but above all for his proposals. His proposals and initiatives in different areas are important. You're quite right, Mr. President. It isn't business as usual now. It is time for us to be courageous and innovative and step outside of ourselves. And we have to show our capacity within this European Union for us Europeans to step up to the plate at this historic time. And alas, yes, it is an historic moment. And we saw this in the past with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the reunification of the European continent. Europe has to face a major crisis which requires of it a real ability to act, a real political will, solidarity which characterizes the European spirit. President Juncker stressed the situation that we now face with migration and refugees, and it is a critical moment for the European Union. Recent events are just confirming that, and taking now on a scale that we simply hadn't appreciated and may catch us out, challenging our values and requiring us to put our instruments and rules to the test. And there is no ability now for us to hesitate or vacillate. In the Justice and Home Affairs Council meeting in July, the Presidency devoted its entire efforts to putting in place efforts, and in particular setting up a temporary exceptional mechanism for relocation and resettlement. Now, I'm not going to pretend that that wasn't a difficult job of work and that it was sufficient. No, we have to go further and we have to go faster. New proposals by President Juncker today are a major contribution to the process underway, and a further meeting of the Council is planned. We are all aware of the urgency and the need to unite and not be divided. Europe is perfectly capable of managing this crisis, and 0.11% of the population is a figure that was mentioned. That isn't vast. We can manage this crisis if we act in line with our values and face up to challenges and not indulge in splits and show real common political will. The President sets about his work, and we in Council will do everything we can together with the institutions, yours primarily of course, and the Commission, to bring this about. And all of us will have to play our part, and in our debate on migration immediately hereafter we will see that is the case. Mr. President, we were able to present the other priorities of our presidency, which pretty carefully dovetail with those that have been set out by the President of the Commission. It is true that we mustn't forget issues of unemployment and the economic relaunch that is required, and also the problems of unemployment, particularly youth unemployment. We have an investment plan that we now must set about deploying boldly and swiftly, and the President mentioned that just a moment ago. The Luxembourg presidency is very attached to this, and I know that we, Mr. President, are on a wavelength with you, and we have to take the social dimension further of the European Union. I listened very carefully to what you said about social dumping, getting the same pay for the same work, and the freedom of movement issue. That has to be preserved. But in order to preserve the freedom of movement, we have to strike the balance between social rights on the one hand and economic freedoms on the other hand. We support the Commission in its efforts to reactivate the single market, and in particular the digital single market. The digital single market will not only transform our industry and services, but also our whole way of working, and the labour market too, and will have a fundamental impact on qualifications and skills, which we must urgently ensure are tackled. Then sustainable development, climate change, global warming, and the decisive COP21 conference, which is going to be a turning point, a critical moment. And we shouldn't forget in all this that the refugee crisis is fundamentally the result of other crises and terrifying conflicts in our European backyard. And if I look at our backyard, we can't say that it is characterized by any degree of stability. It is racked by crisis and conflict, and Europe must be an actor on the international stage. CFSP has a fundamental role with Federica Mogherini in the lead, and we must ourselves sign up to that, and the international community with us and at the level of the United Nations. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you,
Mr. Schmit. EPP, Mr. Royal.
Herr Kommissionspräsident.
President Office of Council, colleagues, first of all, my thanks, Mr. Juncker, for making it absolutely clear to us that Europe is more than just a blueprint, a project. It consists of values and principles, and this whole issue of migration and refugees may be one which makes it possible for us to return to our values. We have history, a common history, a shared history. We have values, we have principles, and we need to ensure that these are reflected in our actions. And the European member states need to go back home and do their homework to make sure that this actually happens. I'm grateful to you too for having talked about the countries of origin of these refugees and migrants. It's quite right that we need to try to combat the whole issue of trafficking, which compounds the problem. You're right that it's a very complex problem. We need to provide for legal migration into the country, but that again is not something that on its own will resolve the problem. But I think that really we need to think about how we're going to finance this huge challenge. How are we going to make it possible to get to make this become a reality and to get the European citizens on side? We need to have prosperity in Europe, and we need to have full employment. It's not a problem just in Greece, it's a problem throughout the European Union. Therefore, we need to think how we can bring about greater growth, how we can sort out the internal market, our regulations, our legislation, our energy prices, how we can support industry, how can we fund research and development and innovation. I'm just asking questions here, but I do think that these are questions we need to answer if we are going to be able to meet these major challenges and be as coherent in our action as the Commission aspires to be and sounds to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Royal. Mr. Rodriguez.
Monsieur le Président, vous venez de faire...
President, you just made a very courageous speech in favour of the European Union, a union of Europeans. And we support you in that.
The Union is confronted with an existential crisis, and finally what is at stake is for us to ask what kind of people are we Europeans? And this kind of crisis can only be solved by real European solutions. So do you have this tragedy unfolding in our borders with humanitarian crisis out of proportions? The only solution, of course, is a real European asylum system. Do you have this increasing pressure of migration in our borders? Yes, the only solution is a real European migration agenda and a stronger European development cooperation. Do you have these mounting tensions in our labour markets? The only solution is really to come back, as you told, to an agenda for full employment in Europe, and the investment plan is certainly the main engine for this purpose. But can we say that all member states have the conditions to implement such an agenda? I don't think so. I don't think so, as long as the Eurozone is an area of divergence and not an area of convergence. That's why your plan of completing the economic and monetary union is also so important. So to conclude, we do need real European solutions. And for this, we parliamentarians, we need to represent not only the citizens of our countries, but European citizens as a whole.
Grazie.
Thank you. I just want to say that I can't allow any blue cards because we're really late. So I ask people also to keep their speaking time. Otherwise, voting time is really going to overlap with this afternoon. So, please, the Speaker hesitates. No, I'm going to be strong and stringent. Also with speaking time. TERRICABRAS, 1 minute. Thank you.
We know that the situation of those refugees who manage to arrive to European soil is dramatic. Technical and political solutions are badly needed. Let us be clear and honest, you repeated, and you referred to root causes. Well, now I just want to make an ethical consideration much too often avoided. The first thing that should be done by the Council, the Commission and this Parliament is to recognise that some European countries are greatly, not exclusively, but greatly responsible for the present situation, not just because of the wild invasion of Iraq, but also because they are guilty of inaction or ineffective involvement in many Mediterranean and Middle East conflicts which have given rise to what we now collect. This recognition would be a first gesture of morality and justice, and it would help to better understand the other steps we should immediately take. Grazie, Presidente.
Onorevole Castaldo.
Thank you, Castaldo. Yes, thank you, President Juncker. You talked about really we're in a hard place. You're right. But there's an empty place over there, Mr. Tusk's. More than the State of the Union, we should be talking about states of the Union. Europe, if you measure it against its principles, we're quarrelling about little money for Mare Nostrum, money for refugees and that sort of thing. And in Eastern countries, they seem to have forgotten the time when they had refugees. We've forgotten about the consequences of our trade policies, the consequences of what our multinationals do, and we don't have the courage to denounce them, including multinationals from China and the United States, other than just talking about TTIP. The Arabs, with the exception of Lebanon and Jordan, have done pretty much nothing to help their Syrian colleagues. In fact, they've done a lot to destabilize the Middle East. We don't say that, with the complicity of our governments, actually. And it's really the strong beating the weak, and the weak bowing to the strong. That seems to be Europe. Europe is a cowardly entity at the moment. A lot of people think as something which is a lemon to be squeezed. No, it's rights for migrants, duties and rights for all. It's not easy, but the five-star movement won't do anything until you denounce and do what is right.
I now call Mr. de GRAAFF, and I would reiterate my plea to you colleagues, please adhere to your speaking time, because otherwise you're overrunning into your colleagues' time. Thank you, President. Today, Mr. Juncker has presented a plan for us to allocate 160,000 refugees throughout the European Union. This is an Angela Merkel plan. It's not a Juncker plan. Angela Merkel and François Hollande want to impose this plan on the European Union. Where is democracy in the European Union? Germany simply decides what it is, and it's decided that it can't quite cope with all those numbers of refugees. Therefore, it will give some to some of the other countries, and it isn't going to look at the whole question of financing at all. This Merkel plan isn't saying that we're going to stop handouts to everybody who comes with a terrible story, however credible it may be, asylum seeker or refugee. The Merkel plan is like Schengen. It's simply failing us, and we're opening the floodgates to allowing in IS people into the European Union. I'd say to Mrs. Merkel, solidarity with the European citizen is vital. Understanding for their security is vital too. Close the frontiers and stop forking out money for hundreds of refugees and asylum seekers, whilst 120,000 citizens of Europe are living in dire poverty. Thank you.
President of the Commission, President of the Parliament, in the name of the Polish delegation in the EPP, my condolences to you. The situation has been changing dynamically. Therefore, in the name of the Polish delegation, I want to say we come from a country, parliamentarians don't come from the moon, but from specific countries. We have an eastern border of the EU. We are thankful for your mentioning of the tragic situation that may also produce itself from the side of the Ukraine. You mentioned that. The situation is so unclear that it is not known what will happen next. We share your opinion that not only relocation is a solution, but also a holistic approach, a set of tools and instruments to be applied. The situation has been dynamic. So also in Poland, we realized the humanitarian disaster, and we're debating in Poland on increasing the capacity to accept refugees. There's been a proposal by our Prime Minister to increase the number, but we think that control over the process should be in the hands of particular member states. One final remark, ladies and gentlemen, President, we come from country and countries where we understand very well what is happening, and we want to show solidarity, but we would not allow to be forced to be blackmailed with financial funds, because that's counterproductive. That is against the European spirit. We are in favor of helping, but we'll discuss about ways and means how we can help. Thank you.
La parola all'onorevole Guerrero Salom.
Guerrero Salom.
Cuando concluya el curso político.
President, as the political year changes over, we're almost in the middle of a legislature, and it's about a decade now since the economic recession took hold. For our economy, this has been a lost decade. In terms of social policy, we've actually gone backwards rather than forwards. This is a moment where we have to have a radical rethink, and where we have to recognise that we've committed ourselves to achieving the AAA status in social policy, and that we can't resolve the issue of austerity at the cost of worse social policy solutions than we had. We ought to be moving towards a single employment insurance scheme. We ought to be combating social dumping and fiscal dumping, and we ought to be moving towards a single minimum wage. Hundreds of thousands of people the world over are refugees or internally displaced persons. They're fleeing from war, but they're also fleeing from poverty and from hunger. And these days, right throughout the world, there are more people who are dying from hunger and starvation than through weapons and warfare. The European Union needs to speak out against this. The European Union needs to speak loudly and clearly at the Conference on Humanitarian Policy, which is taking place in Istanbul in the spring. The Commission has already presented a communication, and the Parliament will do its report. The European Council will adopt some conclusions at the end of the year. But we will be judged in Istanbul not on the basis of what we say, not on the basis of what we've written, but on the basis of what we have been doing and done on our own soil, whether we have shown solidarity, whether we have shown responsibility, and whether we've lived up to our principles. Otherwise we can't go to Istanbul and ask anyone to do anything for those who've IDPs the rest of the world over. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Speaker. I have a minute at my disposal, not much time. I'd like to speak about the situation in Ukraine, which Mr. Juncker mentioned as well in his statement. What's happening, what Russia's doing vis-à-vis Ukraine, it's simply not dignified in a modern society. The civil population is suffering. There are many people at risk, and as elected politicians, our role is to do something about this forcefully. We have the Council of Europe, we have the European Parliament, and we also have the Swedish Riksdag, the Swedish Parliament. In all three fora we have talked about the introduction of diplomatic conversations, which are essential. That being said, I think that there are certain people who are not being very fair vis-à-vis our party regarding Russia, the fact that it should leave Crimea. This is something absolutely essential. The winter is just around the corner, and I'm afraid that Russia might try new tactics, such as cutting off gas supplies. That would have a terrible consequence on the people in Ukraine. And therefore, I and my party will still support the measures that are necessary in order to resolve this conflict. You have my word.
Madam Atkinson.
Onorevole Atkinson.
Madam Atkinson.
Onorevole Lamassoure.
Mr. Lamassoure.
Monsieur le Président.
President, I would like to thank and congratulate the President of the European Commission for his very lofty vision, his leadership and his European spirit that underpin his words. Things that very often are not particularly forthcoming in European policies and politics. You have said that we should not hide the cruel reality that there's a lack of Europe in the Union and a lack of union in Europe, in the European Union. You said that the European Union is not working well despite our common efforts, because very often the policies are hijacked by national political leaders. The Council is not working well. They have to decide on the basis of unanimity, and are very often guided by nationalist positions. They debate all sorts of issues like migration behind closed doors. And there was dishonourable and shameful bartering in the first meeting in June. And we seem to be conceding to the dictatorship of urgency, taking a fast, quick fit measure rather than thinking in the long terms. And by negligence and as a result of hypocrisy, the Ministers of Finance, who are currently taking a look at the draft community budget for 2016, are grouping together all those budget lines for financing immigration and asylum. Yes, we need to put more Europe into the Union and more of the Union into Europe.
Onorevole Weidenholzer.
Mr. Weidenholzer.
Dankeschön.
Thank you very much. Thank you, President Juncker. I want to thank you for your annual report. It is in fact the right time for honesty, and it's a time for more Europe. The refugee problem, in fact, is a test for our European values. If we don't manage to meet this challenge, we could lose everything. But we can also win a great deal through this situation. I want to thank you very much that we haven't just brought the discussion down to the issue of quotas, because you see that that is something that's not going to work. You've been honest that actually we are doing too little at the moment. We need more resources, we need more cooperation. And it's not just the matter of hotspots that we're going to be dealing with. We now see there are 10,000s of people who are on the Balkan routes at the moment, in the rain and the wind. And we can see that if this continues, we can see there may be huge human catastrophe in the future. So I think it's extremely important that now we have some concrete measures, proper resources for concrete measures. And I think that's what we need to look forward to in order to find a solution to the problem. Thank you very much. And now Mr. González Pons.
Señor Juncker.
Mr. Juncker, let me take an example. More than 4 million unemployed in Spain, and nevertheless we are going to accept the proposal made today by the Commission out of generosity, out of solidarity, out of humanity, and also because we believe as Europeans we have an ethical duty to help all those who are fleeing war and fanaticism. Because as you said, Mr. Juncker, it's important not to forget the Republicans of our own civil war and of course all the people who were displaced by the two world wars on this continent. We need a common asylum policy, certainly. We also need an external peace policy that is common, and we need a policy on tolerance and coexistence. And we need, if you like, a different Schengen Treaty, a mental Schengen Treaty, one in our minds, one that breaks down barriers in our very own hearts. There was this photograph of this poor Syrian boy who was washed up on the shores of Turkey, and it moved a lot of people. But let me be quite clear, this is not the first boy to have died. There are thousands who have died before him, and unfortunately there will be many more. Syria is not the only war that we have in our neighborhood. We have refugees. We will also have those who will come here because of climate change, because of hunger, because of illness and disease. And we're talking about the fact that these people need to be welcomed into the European Union. They will need to be welcomed. It won't be easy. It will be a lengthy process, far from straightforward. It's a challenge for us, and it's a goal for the next few years as far as we're concerned. And of course it's something that we're going to be living with for some years still. It's not the question of how many. The question is when. When will the international community put an end to this war? Because as long as this war is still being waged, there simply won't be enough quotas to deal with the problem. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Madame Pervenche BERÈS.
Yes, thank you, President. Just like very many others, I'd like to express my condolences to you, but I would also like to thank you for the speech that you gave us this morning, because I think it goes right to the heart, not of the community method, but to the heart of the European Union and its value of solidarity, because without solidarity, nothing is possible. Solidarity, which is the linchpin, is the keystone of the European Union, of the Eurozone, and which is a value which is so dear to the hearts of the political family that I belong to. And obviously we're going to make every effort to implement the agenda that you have outlined to us today. And it's in this spirit that I would like to thank the European Commission, because they have managed to prevent the Grexit, because Grexit would have meant the unravelling of all European solidarity. But we went further than that. You yourself pointed out that the crisis is not yet over, and we're going to have to be courageous enough to tackle the whole problem of debt. All observers know that the debt that we have at the moment is unsustainable. So let us continue with our efforts to solve this problem on the basis of solidarity. You have also said that you want to have some kind of economic governance, an economic government which will face up to all these challenges, and which will also make member states confront the whole issue of welcoming these numbers of refugees. But don't forget the stick and don't forget the carrot, Mr. President, because solidarity needs that as well. We need the necessary financial resources. So please take the support of the European Parliament, not only the proposals from the Commission. Thank you very much, President.
Madame Gardini. Thank you, Chair. I would once again like to state our pride in always having supported you, Mr. Juncker, as President of the Commission. When we hear you speak, we actually recognize the shared values that we have, and I can see that we believe in the same Europe that you believe in. And I think that really your speech, so complete, so tailored, and so strong in expressing the values of our Christian Europe, and also such a comprehensive presentation. And I think that it isn't simply a partial vision that you're giving us. I think that what we need to do today is to in a common fashion, get over the obstacles that confront us at the moment in order to ensure that in the short, medium and long term that we can actually respond to this dramatic situation that is above all a human tragedy and a historical moment. Mr. Weber, the head of our group, has said this, that we have always seen in Italy that we, our party, Forza Italia, in fact, has wanted to push forward to be a supporter for your proposals. And I think that the message that you're giving is now getting over. I can see it in today's newspapers that what we're doing mustn't simply be a matter of false hopes and illusions. What we've got to do is actually to respond rationally and usefully to the challenge that we're facing in order in fact to avoid future tragedies. Thank you for your group, and we are going to work with you very closely.
Onorevole Toia.
Madam Toia.
Thank
you, Mr. Juncker. This isn't ordinary times for the Union. We are going through a historic moment and we need strong European leadership. We need to ensure that Europe is in fact a school for these values. The history shows us what's happening, and in fact European history is this today. It's not just it's the crisis, it's unemployment, it's migrations. We're being attacked from the outside. We're being threatened by instability in the south and the southeast of our borders. We see this through this flux of people who are coming towards us. And what we need from you is guidance. We need to find a common European road that goes over and above mediocrity, that goes over and above these narrow, national, egoistic interests. We have to explain to all of our countries that, in fact, it is European solidarity and unity that has brought us together in the past and can do so in the future. I heard what Mr. Pittella said, and I want to ask you, as indeed he said, to be courageous, because it is a matter of urgency. As we said thousands of times, we often act, but often too late and often not quickly enough. And now the floor goes to Mr. Spiraki.
President of the Commission, this winter is starting with the collapse of two illusions, if you like. We have Dublin II, which is imploding, collapsing, and Greece and Italy are still welcoming flows of refugees. We need, of course, more funding for the integration of these refugees, and we must move immediately in order to get a fair distribution, a binding one. The Commission is right. Now this needs to be implemented. Greece is welcoming a lot of refugees on Kos, on Lesbos, on these islands. There are many families arriving with their children, and we know what their situation is like as refugees. We have, of course, to protect our borders. As a European Union, we have to help our countries, but you have to also remember that because things have imploded, populism is not the answer. The new government in Greece will have to think about reforms. That should be top of their agenda. There has to be stability, and there has to be a stable financial environment. And we can't just turn back, turn around. We will succeed. We will succeed with the support of the EU. The Irish, the Spaniards and the Portuguese already have.
Please try and keep to the time. I don't want to cut anyone's time, but I will be forced to do so if you don't actually stick to the amount of time you've been given. Mr. García Pérez. For 1 minute.
President, thank you very much. Press headlines, June 2015. The European fails in deciding the share out of refugees. Spain rejects the quota suggested by the European Commission. It is true that it has been national selfishness and egoism that has put obstacles in our path when it comes to trying to respond to the most serious crisis of the past few years. But obviously we have to address other issues and aspects which are of fundamental nature if the Commission is trying to sort this out. Europe is not going to exit the crisis nor create growth unless we invest money in other areas as well. So we do very much welcome the first steps that have been taken by the Juncker plan. But there's another fundamental issue. Where is the social Europe in all of this? Where are the fights against inequalities? And what about the initiatives targeting a minimum salary, minimum wage? And what about the incentives to bring about equal treatment between men and women, everything to tackle social dumping? Mr. Juncker, time is passing, and unfortunately Europe is not going to hang around and wait for it.
Herr Präsident, meine Damen und Herren, Sie haben...
Ladies and gentlemen, now you've invested a great deal in building awareness, where we come from, who we are, and where we're going. That was the right thing to do. It was necessary. The whole idea of Europe, the political project in Europe, is in fact our work programme. National egoism, the lack of courage, the lack of justice, the contradiction between words and action, the lack of decisiveness, these are problems. In fact, it is up to us. When we think about it, we want to do it. We can, in fact, overcome all of the challenges that face us. With lots of signals coming from lots of member states that, in fact, give us courage and give us hope. The work between the NGOs and civil society and, in fact, a significant public commitment and involvement. The waves of refugees that we see, the hunger that we see, these are facts. These are facts, in fact, which stand at the perhaps birth of a new European development, security and diplomatic policy. The opportunity, in fact, for a proper European Union.
Niedermüller.
Mr. Niedermüller.
Thank you very much, President. Ladies and gentlemen, change has always been a driving force for Europe, the fact that we adapt to a new world. This refugee crisis has created a situation where either we change, in which case we'll be stronger and we'll go forward and we'll overcome the situation, or alternatively we give up on our basic principles, our values, in which case we're also giving up on our future. We can't tolerate this any longer. We have bad compromises, we have rules that are out of date, we have leaders who unfortunately are not as good as their word. We cannot tolerate this with refugees sleeping in railway stations, by the sides of motorways, and becoming the victims of smugglers, traffickers. We therefore have to take a new initiative. We need to have the distribution key, but this is only the beginning. We have a lot of responsibility and absolutely no time to spare. We have to count on greater solidarity in Europe, and I think you can expect solidarity if you also show solidarity towards the refugees rather. This is what the European Union is premised upon. Thank you.
Sr. Presidente, caro Presidente da Comissão, esta questão da...
Mr. President and the Commission, this question of the crisis in immigration, in fact, has an advantage for those of us who are in favour of more Europe, because under this chapter, as indeed under other chapters, we need more Europe and not less Europe. And that's why I would like to talk about the economy today. It is a question which is of concern to Ireland, to Portugal, to Greece and to Spain. In Portugal we've made enormous efforts. The same thing has been done in Spain and in Ireland in order to get to a better situation. And so now I've got a concrete question, which is, our Prime Minister has a vision for Europe. And in this context, he proposes that there should be a mechanism put in place in order to help the unemployed. Thank you very much for your attention in this issue.
Passiamo al catch the eye. Potrò dare la...
So now, the time is very, very short, so please, you've only got 1 minute each, and please try and respect that time. Christos, please, Mr. Christos.
Yes, thank you, President. I'd like to start off by warmly thanking President Juncker for his leading role in trying to overcome this political crisis. And I would just like to say that in Greece there are some quite impressive political changes. There is we have elections now, and my own political party has decided to enter a cooperation immediately after the elections with other political parties. We know that there are certain measures being taken, but we still have an economic crisis. And we have to be able to show after the elections that we are in a position to be able to master the crisis. But in order to do that, we are going to need support from Mr. Juncker and the institutions so that we can have more flexible policies, especially when it comes to taxation of small and medium-sized companies and other sectors as well. And I think, first of all, we have to show that we're consistent, but then, of course, tax policies, I think, are going to have to be made a little more flexible so that we can get out of the tax.
Blanco.
Now the floor goes to Mr. Blanco.
Mr. Blanco.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, President. In this debate, I think it's important to hear the voice of a crisis, of a sector in crisis. We're talking about farmers, livestock farmers who want a fair price for their production, dairy farmers in particular, and dairy products. We have hundreds of farms. If we don't come up with an answer, an immediate answer from the Commission, an answer that would set minimum intervention prices, if we don't do that, then the dairy sector and thousands of farms in regions such as my own, Galicia, will simply disappear. That's why it's so necessary to hear their voice, hear the voice of these farmers. They are on our streets. We need to answer them. We need to answer them immediately, and we need to be fair in our response. And the European Commission really should do something about this immediately, and you should set some prices, minimum intervention prices or buying prices, in order to rebalance this market.
Now, Mr. Maria. We've heard from Mr. Juncker, and I think that a lot of very interesting things have been said, but you talked about the Greek situation, and you also said that this in fact is a contribution to the situation is needed. 30 billion euros is needed. But this 30 billion euros, those are resources that in any way are available for Greece on the basis of the social programme up to 2020. Now, we heard that I think Juncker, in fact, has been a rather cynical supporter of the Greeks, in fact, has threatened the Greek situation. And I think that you have to think of the role of the Troika in this situation. You actually have got to not act as, in fact, a representative of neo-colonialists, which are currently deciding what ought to happen in Greece. So I think that we don't want to listen to these threats. We want to understand a better way of dealing with it. Madam Bagazzoa.
Sono in aula?
Is the lady in the chamber or not?
Gracias, Presidente.
Yes, here I am. Thank you very much, President. A year ago we voted for you, and I do very much welcome the speech you made today, because you addressed the issues that are of concern to the European Union. There are those who come up with all sorts of excuses. We've seen national selfishness and egoism, and we have all these crises, the migratory crisis now, and we have seen that we have a union with ever more poorer citizens. The crisis is getting more and more serious, and the citizens need leadership, not excuses. If you take a look at the nationalism of our states and the weakness of each and every one of us when it comes to assuming our responsibilities, generates a sort of vicious, toxic circle. It generates populism, and that generates far more irresponsibility in member states like the UK and Hungary. And this is getting very serious. And I think all of us have to assume our responsibility, and you can count on us when you need it.
Vielen Dank. Thank you very much. Now it is MEP Forenza.
Presidente, io credo che questo...
President, I think that this morning was a historic debate. I'd like to repeat that we cannot allow any hypocrisy to enter into the debate here. I think that the distinction that is made between refugees and economic migrants in fact is a fictitious distinction. We have got the responsibility to save lives. We've got to save the lives of people who are flying from destabilized countries, from war and from hunger, very often situations that we contributed to creating. And people, of course, are talking about an emergency, and people talk about emergency because they see the images in the press. But we've got to be talking about actually is a structural change in the Union's policies. We've got to be talking about a change in the asylum reform. We've got to give proper routes into Europe. We've got to think about how we tear down the walls that exist and how we can render absurd the statements such as help people back at home, because very often we've destroyed their houses back at home.
Das Wort hat jetzt Frau Lunacek.
I call Mrs. Lunacek.
Danke, Herr Präsident.
Thank you very much, President. President of the Commission, I must say I was impressed today by most of what you had to say. Not so much TTIP. We as Greens don't agree with you on that regarding TTIP and the stopping thereof, but the long first part of your speech where you spoke about solidarity with refugees, the fact that member states must finally step up to the plate, that is worthy of respect. And I can tell you're serious about this. You take this seriously. The situation is abnormal. For instance, cutting our development work rather than increasing it, that's not normal. Also, financially, materially, we need to make sure that we have the resources to help those who are fleeing war and conflict. And you're also serious about asylum seekers. From the very first day of their application, they should be allowed to work in order to make their own money, to earn some money. I don't think the heads of state and government wanted this so far. I hope that others will follow and will adopt that proposal. We need also a President of Council here in the Chamber who's here when we debate these things, and not a President of Council who basically is just in Council, and you've got the Commission and you've got the European Parliament. You know, they need to stand by our side and show what solidarity in Europe means. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Lunacek. That brings us to the end of the debate, but before closing, I give the floor to the President of the Commission, Mr. Juncker.
Vielen herzlichen Dank.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, President. Well, it is true, I spoke at such length that when it came to the presidential request and desire that I not reply at such great length, I shall respect that. So I think if I can manage not to speak at such length, then I think everybody will think that's a good idea. And hopefully I won't be interrupted, but and if I'm not interrupted, then I'm only too happy to respect your request. I'll take 2 or 3 or maybe 5 sentences to be able to reply to the debate and point out first of all that it is true that the President of the Council has not been represented, but we do have the presidency. We have a Luxembourg minister, a minister who for many years has been responsible for immigration issues. And he knows what is being talked about. And he's the one that is present on behalf of the Council presidency. And I'm extremely grateful for the fact that he has been here. And then on some of the comments that have been made, regarding the President of the Council, you can't criticise Mr. Tusk that he's not here. I'm not his spokesperson. Well, where was Mr. Van Rompuy when these debates were held over the past few years? This is a debate between the European Commission and the European Parliament. And this is how it has been established and set out in the agreement between the Commission and the European Parliament. And when it comes to Mr. Tusk, I had quite lengthy talks together with Mr. Tusk over the past couple of weeks about my speech. And if I hadn't consulted him, otherwise if I hadn't consulted him, my speech wouldn't have been as it is now. He currently is in Turkey because there are issues that have to be dealt with in Turkey. And I think it's far more important that the President of the Council, Mr. Tusk, be in Turkey rather than here in the hemicycle listening to the debate between the European Parliament and the European Commission. So that is the situation, as I said. I have prepared the debate and the speech together with the President of the European Council, and as I said, he's in Turkey, and I would really like to defend him against the criticism that has been levelled at him, because I don't think that it is at all appropriate or justified. On Greece, because a number of people have referred to that particular problem, the issue. There was the 35 million package proposed by the Commission, and this is made up of monies from the structural funds. But Greece, just like all governments, because of a lack of administration and because they weren't able to do so, have not been able to absorb the monies and the funds that were available. And so under Vice President Dombrovskis, what the Commission has done is try and gather together all administrative and human resources within the Commission so that we can help Greece in a very short period of time, and with all the necessary administrative measures, implementing those measures that were already in place, so that we can help Greece do what actually Greece should have been doing over very many years and hasn't really been doing over the past few months. But I could speak at length on Greece. I have accepted a lot of criticism about Greece. We have the programme that was negotiated, and well, no, it's not the best programme that could have been negotiated, not necessarily a model to be repeated. But we did carry out a social impact assessment of the programme, and this wasn't referred to by anybody. Obviously, if we hadn't done our work, you would have criticised the Commission for not having carried out this impact assessment. But we did do that. In Greece, then obviously there is the whole question of the various measures. What about a higher level of VAT being applied in restaurants or the food chains? Is that a technical measure or political measure? We decided that we should adopt as in political measures. It's important to know what we're doing. The President of the European Commission has himself assumed the various demands that have been made, and there were certain proposals about the defence budget for the Greek government, not made by the Greek government itself, and I suggested that we should take a look at measures for the shipbuilding sector. I'm a conservative Christian Democrat, and I was very surprised to have to ward off certain measures coming from the Greek government. So I was trying to say that there should be fairer taxation of the wealthier Greeks, not those that were suffering, the poorer people. It wasn't Mr. Tsipras. No, yes, this is the kind of discussion we had. No, that's not. Well, you listen to one and you don't necessarily listen to the other. But I'm not going to go on at length on the Greek state, because otherwise you'll have said that I will have been intervening in domestic politics in Greece. But I do very much welcome some of the more polite, the kinder words that Mr. Tsipras addressed to me, out of keeping with some other words that were addressed to me, have been addressed to me in the press over the past few days. But I think if the Commission had not been there, then the adjustment programme that would have been adopted would have been rather different, and the results and the consequences would have been different as well. And we feel that the programme that has been that was adopted was the most nuanced that we have been able to conclude. And here I would like to pay tribute to other countries as well: Ireland, Portugal, Spain, Latvia. They've all shown that by implementing these measures, and they prove my idea that if good reforms are implemented, then they bring about the right results, and obviously better results than if you've done nothing. On the subject of TTIP, I've heard what everybody's said. I'm not naive. Switches into German. I'm not naive at all. We need this trade treaty. But then we have to take a look at the conditions underpinning this trade treaty. And this is something that the Commission and the Member States obviously have to negotiate. But to say right from the outset that we do not need this trade agreement, this trade treaty, that is a position I cannot support. We need to trade and we need to negotiate to have a trade treaty, but we do need this trade treaty, and under conditions which are very much in keeping with the European spirit and European values. Moving on to agriculture now, obviously you'll be getting certain documents later, but I feel very close to the European farmers as a former Prime Minister, as a former Finance Minister as well. I've always defended a common European policy because a Europe without farmers, a Europe without vintners, without countryside stewards, well, Europe will not survive. So we can't leave the farmers out in the cold now. And the European Commission, of course, is going to do everything possible to try and help solve the milk crisis, because this affects the livelihood of our farmers. Now, we have already come up with 1 or 2 initial proposals, and we're going to be turning to the Euro Council and the Parliament so that we can make further proposals. So, President, thank you very much for the great attention that you have accorded me today.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Juncker. Thank you for your statements. We now move on to the next item on our agenda, Council and Commission statements on migration and refugees. First of all, I call the President of Council, Minister Nicolas Schmit. Mr. Schmit, you have the floor, sir.
Monsieur le Président,
President of the Commission, ladies and gentlemen, MEPs, we have just heard President Juncker, and we all know that the situation, which was already very difficult before this summer, has now taken a tragic scale, with record numbers of refugees coming in through the main principal routes, the Eastern Mediterranean, the Central Mediterranean and the Western Balkans route. Now, this situation, in fact, can be distinguished from the previous because of its scale, the incredible speed of events on the ground, and the confusion which we see. The pressure on our capacity to welcome these people, our administrative and linguistic capacities, are considerable. But over and above the figures and the administrative issues we have to deal with, it is absolutely basic that we remember in this debate that the situation is above all a situation about human tragedies, all different. This touches real people, it hits real families. Confronted by a situation of such complexity, there is no straightforward, easy answer. The situation requires a firm response and a coherent response from Europe, a response that brings together the responsibility on one hand and solidarity on the other. And we have to put into place a common policy that is sustainable when it comes to migration. We have to move forward quickly, also thinking about the future and preparing sustainable global solutions for the long term. Given the external dimension of the problems that we're facing, and taking into account its impact on Europe, the member states and the relationships between them, it is absolutely essential that we make clear and obvious that we're not going to manage to solve this situation by moving forward in a fragmented fashion. And I can only repeat what in fact I said in the previous debate. Our first worry, our first concern is about people and their safety. This is a moral obligation. It is an obligation that we have under international law, as indeed all of the other state actors who are present in the areas of conflict where these migratory flows come from or through which they transit. Next, we have to ensure that there is a dignified and decent reception for all the people who could benefit from the regime of international protection. And I would like, quite simply, remind us what the President of the Commission said about these thousands, these tens of thousands of Europeans, these European citizens who have shown a wave of solidarity, an incredible wave of solidarity. I think that this shows the capacity of Europe to work together. It also shows, to take wonderful words from the Germans, this period of the Enlightenment. It is an Enlightenment Europe that we support, that we love, and that we have to push forward. We've also got to put into place, of course, systems to receive these individuals that are up to the task, both in the territory of the European Union and in third countries, and that requires a common effort. We're not going to do it without budgetary implications, and that, of course, is of great importance to you here. If we look at the Balkan route, the majority of the people who are travelling are eligible for international protection. Twice, during the past few months, the heads of state and government have looked at the complex challenge of migration and refugee status. They have quite properly called for the development of a comprehensive approach concentrating on three key issues that have got to move forward in parallel: the localization and the resettlement, the retour and the readmission and the reinsertion, and cooperation with the original countries and indeed the transit countries. During the month of July, the Council moved ahead in the area of relocalization and resettlement. Now, because we're already talking about some of the emergency issues that confront us, I want to thank you here in the Parliament for adopting today the Keller report. This